Well, hello, I'm Tyler Hogan with Bright Ideas Press, and with me is Susan Barton, and we're here today to talk a little bit about A Young Scholar's Guide to Poetry. Now, Susan, you're a poetry person, right? Tell us
Yes.
a little bit about your love for poetry.
Well, it's kind of funny how that started because I was just in fifth grade and I was tagging along with my mom, who was finishing a master's degree. And I would hang out in the library after I had completed homework. And I found the poetry stacks. And
Hmm.
I just started devouring all of this British poetry and early American poetry. And I was reading Shakespeare and Longfellow and Emily Dickinson. Not only did I fall in love with this rich use of words, but I felt like I knew these people because the poetry is just, it was such a intimate way to understand someone's reception of the world, that they were really just expressing their inmost thoughts of how they experience the events around them, the places, the culture that they come from. So those people just became characters or people that I identified with, to the extent that when I graduated, that was the scholarship that I graduated with. I had a literature and composition scholarship. My major was in communication, and now I find myself here with Tyler, leading a publishing company and talking about poetry again.
There you go. Well, and there's your why teach poetry. It develops that love of language and it builds those communication skills and those empathy skills. And that's so important. And now you really have come full circle because you actually got to work on the poetry book too, didn't you?
I did. It was my first major project when I came on board at Bright Ideas Press, and it was just such a moment of aha, I've found my place, because I was reaching out to lawyers in little offices in the middle of London, and I would find some of these family members that held copyrights out in countrysides in England in castles still. So it was no longer this surreal experience of these poets that I so adored, even as a young girl. But now it was realizing that these were real families and real business associates that cared deeply about preserving the things that these people had written about their lives and their times. So it made it all much more tangible.
Who would have thought that securing copyright permissions would let you just interact with a legacy in such a neat way?
Oh,
That's
it's
really
so
cool.
cool.
Now, if hypothetically I were not a poetry person, is this book, A Young Scholar's Guide to Poetry, still for me?
Absolutely. You know, one of the things that is so core to our um, our beliefs at BIP is, as we reach out to families, we want you to love learning. And that's really all this book is about. It's not about saying, here's the way this person wrote poetry, now you need to master that, and here's a blank piece of paper, and you go write yours, and I'm going to grade you on it. That's not the experience. I know, isn't that terrifying? It's either an empty blank page or blank screen. That's so hard for any writer. But that's not what we're doing here. This is really a playful exploration of what poetry is, and the use of language to communicate rich things, deep things, colorful things, funny things, that
Mhm.
it's really about connecting with other humans. So it's a playful exploration of poetry. It's really not something that is very foreign.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I love about this book and the Young Scholar's Guide to Composers too, is that it puts the human back in humanities because it's a study of not just the art or the music or the poem, but also the people who created them. And when you look at how the book is arranged, every lesson is both biography and poetic devices or genres or what have you. So you're getting that this is what the building blocks of the poems are, but also these are the people who used those blocks or pioneered those blocks in some special way.
I love that about the humanities. That's really the essence of studying any discipline in the humanities, is that human component.
Hmm.
So Tyler, do what would a student cover in the study of poetry and YSGP?
So, Young Scholar's Guide to Poetry has three main units. The first one is on poetic structure. So you're going to be talking about things like rhyme scheme. You're going to learn the difference between a couplet and a triplet, and a haiku, or a sonnet, or what is this whole free verse thing all about. So you get a sense of how, the scaffolding that the poem is built around, and it just helps you really understand some of those mechanics, and then also the people who built and used those kinds of mechanics. The second unit is on genre. So like any other element of literature, there's different genres of poetry. So we talk about, what makes something a ballad, or narrative verse, or nonsense verse. What does a pastoral poem look like, or devotional poetry? So we cover all those different genres and the people who wrote in those genres. And then the last unit is on language. And this is where you get into some of those poetry specific terms like, consonants, assonance, alliteration. You start talking about onomatopoeia and rhythm and symbolism and imagery and personification, and, all of that fancy poetry talk, and the people who pioneered those things and made great use of them. So you've got those three units, and then at the end of each unit, you have a unit review that wraps it all up and puts a nice neat bow on it, and then a poet craft lesson, which is where your student would actually, put pencil to paper, or keys to keyboard and start trying their hand at writing their own poems. So if you have a reluctant poet, this is a very gentle introduction. So you do a lot more reading and analyzing than you do writing. And when you do the writing, like we said, there's the scaffold that's already erected for you. So you're not just staring at a blank piece of paper. It holds your hand and walks you through. All right, let's try out a couplet. Find two words that rhyme and see how we can string them together. Or, let's put a metaphor together and try and, just pull that gently out of your brain and onto the page. So it has a very, like I said, a very gentle way of getting people used to putting their thoughts and feelings into written format.
Well, you've used a lot of really big terms from a poetry glossary, but we've also talked about how accessible our book is. And so, what age range of student is this really ideal for?
So the target grades are 3rd through 8th grade. So, and this is a great study to use together as a family. So whether you've got, younger ones or older ones, they can all be participating in it and enjoying the discovery and the fun, and laughing along together. If you've got older students in high school, this is a great part of a complete English credit. I wouldn't use it as a full high school credit all by itself, but it's certainly a great place to supplement the rest of your English studies. So it's definitely adaptable for high school, but the target is 3rd through 8th grade.
So going back to our contents, one of the conventions at Bright Ideas Press for any of the families that are new to us is that we have a student reader and we have a companion guide for each topic. So can you share with us a little bit more about what is in the student reader and what is in the companion guide?
Sure. So the student reader, I got one right here. So it's beautiful, hardcover, glossy, colorful, and it's just your lesson text. You probably won't be able to see it on the camera, but it's lovely illustrated, and it's just what you're going to be reading. So you've got 32 lessons that you'll read throughout the year. Each lesson has half of its biography, half of it is poetic devices, and then you've got those several lessons that are unit reviews and poetcraft. And then everything else that really makes it a curriculum, you're going to find that in the companion guide. And that's a download. When you buy the book, you have a unique download code in the very front, and it'll let you download your PDF copy of the companion guide, and you can just print out whatever pages you need. So included in the companion guide, you'll find things like lesson reviews. So every lesson has a review. It's 10 questions, just to, gauge comprehension and make sure that you're understanding and retaining what you've been learning about. There's also worksheets for the different lessons. So as you're reading through, it may say, hey, take out this worksheet and underline the various consonants that we're using in this poem, or that the poet is using, so that you can really highlight and understand and identify consonants, assonance, alliteration, or write down the rhyme scheme of this poem. So those pages are all there for you to print out, so you don't have to write in the book.
Are all the poems in the book, Tyler?
Yeah, everything that you need is in the book, but there's also a great book list in the back with recommended additional resources. So you can go read a lot more poems. We've picked the ones that we think are especially important, but there's such a treasure trove out there of poems. So everything you need is in the book, but there's so much more that you can go and explore on your own if you want to. So the companion guide has that whole list of recommended resources as well, and answer keys for your reviews and your worksheet pages. And then it's also got a bunch of other fun things like coloring pages for the different poems. It's got timeline and mapping assignment and graphic organizers and journaling pages for reflection. There's all kinds of great stuff in the companion guide. Review games. It's a lot of fun. Everything that really is going to be interactive and feel like, oh, this is something that I can sink my teeth into. That's what the companion guide is there for.
So tell me about a couple of other things that may be unique to our book. We have things that are called poetry slams, and of course we have memorization and recitation. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those elements?
Sure. So there's instructions in the book on how to memorize a poem, how to recite it. A poetry slam is a gathering of people who do different kinds of recitations of usually original work, and this will give you instructions on how to put one together within your family or a co-op group or friends. And all of these pieces, I just need to emphasize, like with all of the Bright Ideas Press curriculum, we give you more in the book than any one family should try and accomplish in a year. So don't try and do it all. If you want to go deeper and you want to have your kids memorize passages of poetry, that's great. Have fun with it. But don't feel the pressure to try and do it all. We've tried to set up a really doable schedule that's not intimidating. It's very accessible. And even the things that we recommend, pick and choose the ones that are going to work well for you and your family.
What would that schedule look like?
Yeah, let me share that on the screen real quick. So here's a sample schedule. Again, just emphasizing, do what works for you. This is a framework that you can build on. So if you did poetry 3 days a week, your first day, you would read through the lesson. And again, that includes both the biography and the poetic device section. And then you would read the suggested poems that are in the book. And we always recommend reading them out loud as much as you can, just to help build that sense of sound and use of language.
Mm-hmm.
And then do the student review questions. So that can either be done like using it like a note-taking page or as a quiz to see how much they remember and retain. Then on your second day, so in this case, Wednesday, you would reread the poems, and then you would do some of the activities like the timeline and mapping assignments, or filling out the poet info card, which is kind of a graphic organizer that helps you review and remember the biography. And then Friday, if you want to do a third day, you can reread the poems again and just dig a little bit deeper into them. And then fill out your poetry journal, or if you've got younger students, there's a graphic organizer that just helps you reflect on what you've read. And that reflection is a really important part of appreciating poetry. So all of that is scheduled out for you, but again, take the pieces that are going to work best. Maybe you've got lots of timeline and mapping in your history and geography, and you don't need to do any more of that in your poetry studies. That's fine. The core of it is reading the lessons and engaging with the poems.
One of the things that I enjoyed about doing Young Scholars Guide for Poetry at home is that We found time in the evenings when you gather at the table and you're still there after supper, that, like, for example, the section that we do on haiku, it just encourages a student to think of all the words in their head about nature. What's any word that you can think of about nature? And you just brain dump that. You just write out all of that brainstorm. And then you start to take those words together and you make a line of 5 syllables and a line of 7 and a line of 5 again. And we cheer the student on and say, wow, look at that, you've already got a haiku, and now let's play with it, and how can we make it sound better, and what do you really like, what do you want to change or take out? So we encourage just being really playful with words. And that's something that you can come together and do. Say dad or mom hasn't been involved in that lesson during the day, or you have a high school student who is off doing other activities for dual enrollment. You come back to the table and you all have this playful way of learning and exploring something new together, and a student who gets to show off what they've been discovering. So we added that evening time as a part of our schedule. I think that that's really fun.
Yeah, that's really neat. And the book is laid out in such a way that it really works well to use with your whole family, no matter what ages you have. Or in a classroom or a co-op setting, it's really great for that kind of an environment as well. And I think more and more classrooms and co-ops are starting to use these materials and this approach because it just fits so neatly.
I can attest to that. I'm answering those phone calls and sharing those discussions, that this really is one of those things that can, not only is a student discovering a humanity in the subject, they're discovering what that really means with their body of peers, that human connection happens within the classroom, not just with the artists that they're exploring.
Absolutely.
So let's share
So
this.
where could I get my copy?
That's what I was just going to say. Where can I get it? Because now we're all excited about it. So if you are a family and you're looking for a retail purchase, all of our homeschool resellers generally carry Young Scholars Guide, both poetry and composers. If your favorite supplier doesn't happen to have it, send them a note and say, hey, I heard about this at Bright Ideas Press and I'm interested and I'd love for you to carry it. If you have any trouble finding it at all, just drop us a note, contact@brightideaspress.com, and we'll be glad to connect you with a supplier. If you're a supplier or a teacher or an administrator and you need to buy in volume, we would love to get you a whole box or a whole pallet. Just let us know and we'll get you set up. Again, it would be the same contact information, contact@brightideaspress.com. And we're here to help you. Our assistance doesn't stop at buying the book. Whether you're a parent or a supplier, we're here to answer your questions as you use our material, because it's really why we do it in the first place.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Susan.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.